Part 1. The shop that time forgot. In the heart of a small English town stood Ellis & Sons Clockworks, a quaint little shop with a wooden sign that swung gently above the door, faded by rain and sun. The bell above tinkled softly. Inside, the air smelled of polished wood, brass oil, and memories. Seated behind a counter was Arthur Ellis, a man in his late 70s, with twinkling eyes and hands that trembled ever so slightly. He moved between the shelves, winding clocks that ticked in perfect harmony. Each tick was like a heartbeat, a reminder that time never stopped for anyone. But one clock, kept under a glass dome in the back of the shop, was different. It didn't tick. It had stopped at 11:56 p.m., the exact time Arthur's wife, Margaret, had passed away 30 years earlier. Every evening, Arthur would wipe the glass gently, his wrinkled fingers trembling, and whisper, "I'll fix you." One day, that day had not come. One rainy afternoon, as Arthur was about to close the shop, the bell above the door jingled. In stepped a young woman, soaked to the bone. She shook the raindrops from her hair, her eyes scanning the shop until they fell on the silent clock. She walked up to Arthur and said quietly, "You're the man I've been looking for. I think this belongs to you." She placed an envelope on the counter. It was yellowed with age, sealed with red wax, and on the front, in elegant script, were the words, "Margaret Ellis." Arthur's hands, which had been steady a moment ago, trembled. His eyes, cloudy with age, filled with a youthful light. He reached out, his fingers tracing the wax seal, as if it were a lover's caress. "Margaret," he whispered, his voice hoarse with emotion. The young woman watched him, her eyes filled with understanding. She knew the name wasn't just a label on an envelope. It was a portal to a past she could only imagine, a love story that had been paused, not ended. As the rain continued its mournful song outside, the old man in the shop that time forgot opened the envelope, his face lighting up with a smile that was both sad and serene. Inside, nestled against a faded photograph of a smiling couple, lay a key. It was small, no bigger than Arthur's thumb, yet it seemed to hold infinite weight. With trembling hands, he got up, walked to the back of the shop, and with the young woman watching, reached for the clock. He inserted the key into a tiny hole hidden beneath the glass dome. The young woman held her breath, and with a soft click, the clock began to tick. It was the sound of a lifetime, part to the letter that shouldn't exist. Arthur's breath caught as his eyes traced the familiar loops and curls of his late wife's handwriting. It couldn't be. His hand hovered over the envelope, but he didn't touch it. 30 years of carefully locked away grief surged forward all at once, threatening to drown him. The young woman noticed his hesitation. "My name's Clara," she said softly, removing her damp coat and draping it over her arm. "I found this in my grandmother's attic, in a box marked 'Do not open until the time is right.'" Arthur looked up, his brows knitting. "Who was your grandmother?" "Evelyn Moore," Clara replied. "She lived 2 streets from here. Passed away last month." Arthur's face paled. Evelyn Moore, Margaret's closest friend. They had spent countless afternoons together in the shop, laughing over tea while Arthur tinkered with clock gears. But why? Why would Evelyn have a letter from Margaret? And why would it only surface now? Arthur reached for the letter at last, his fingers brushing the rough paper. The wax seal was still intact. He turned it over in his hand, noting how the paper felt cold, despite the warm shop air. I can't open this yet," he murmured. "Not without knowing why it was kept from me." Clara stepped closer, lowering her voice. "Mr. Ellis, my grandmother left me a journal too. It mentioned your wife, and something about the night the clock stopped." Arthur's gaze snapped to the silent dome-covered clock in the corner. "What did it say?" he asked, his voice almost a whisper. Clara hesitated, glancing at the darkened windows, the rain tapping like restless fingers against the glass. "It said Margaret didn't die the way you think she did." The room seemed to shrink. The ticking of the surrounding clocks grew louder, like they were holding their breath. Arthur's hands trembled around the envelope. For 30 years, he'd believed he knew the truth. But now, standing before a stranger, holding his wife's words, he wasn't sure of anything anymore. "Then we need to read it," Clara urged. Arthur shook his head. "Not here. Not tonight. Some things require the right hour. He looked again at the silent clock. The hand still rested at 11:56. Come back tomorrow, Clara, he said. When the night feels exactly like that one. Outside, thunder rolled in the distance, as if time itself had just leaned in to listen. The rain had not let up. By the time Clara returned the next evening, Arthur was already waiting, the letter placed neatly on the counter between them, a small brass key lying beside it. You kept your word, he said, gesturing for her to sit. Clara removed her scarf, her hair damp from the drizzle. I couldn't stop thinking about it all day, she admitted. Arthur nodded slowly. Neither could I, but before we open it, there's something you need to see. He took the brass key and led her to the back of the shop. The floorboards creaked under their feet as they entered a narrow hallway lined with shelves of dusty ledgers and boxers. At the very end stood a tall oak cabinet with a lock so old it looked as though it belonged in another century. Arthur slid the key in, turned it, and the lock gave way with a reluctant click. Inside, resting on faded velvet, was a smaller clock, identical in design to the one under glass in the shop's main room. But this one's face was cracked, its hands frozen at the exact same time. 11:56. Clara stepped closer. Why do you have two of them? I built them together, Arthur said, his voice low, for Margaret's birthday. They were meant to chime in perfect harmony. He stared at the broken clock. On the night she died, both stopped at once. Clara swallowed, surprised by the raw emotion in his voice. And that S when I found her on the bridge, Arthur interrupted, his voice trembling. The police called it an accident, but there was no reason for her to be there at midnight. No reason at all, unless someone had asked her to meet. Clara took a step back, her eyes wide. Mr. Ellis, my grandmother's journal mentioned a meeting. She wrote, Margaret will know the truth tonight, but she may not forgive me. Arthur's head snapped toward her. Forgive her, for what? Clara shook her head. I don't know. But the last entry says, if I'm gone, the letter will find its way to him when the time is right. Arthur's gaze returned to the envelope on the counter, its seal still unbroken. Then I think the time is right now, he said. The air in the shop seemed to tighten as they walked back to the counter. Arthur took the letter in his hands, the weight of 3 decades pressing down on him. He slid a finger under the seal and froze. A shadow moved outside the rain-streaked window. Clara noticed it too. Someone's watching us. Arthur didn't turn toward the glass. Then we're not opening it here after all, he said, his voice firm despite the tremor in his hands. He took Clara's hand, the letter clutched in his other, and whispered, we're going to the bridge. Hello, friends. Part 4. The bridge at midnight. The rain had softened to a cold mist by the time Arthur and Clara reached the old stone bridge. Street lamps lined the road behind them, their yellow glow fading into darkness before touching the span of the bridge itself. Here, the world seemed quieter, as if the night was holding its breath. Arthur stopped at the center, the same spot where Margaret's body had been found 32 years ago. The river below whispered against the rocks, black and endless. Clara pulled her coat tighter. You've been here since then. Every year on this night, Arthur replied, his voice barely above a murmur. To remember. To ask questions no one will answer. He placed the letter on the cold stone railing, running his thumb over the seal. If we open it here, maybe we'll feel what she felt. Maybe we'll understand why she came. Clara glanced around. The shadow they'd seen at the shop was gone. Or hiding. We're not alone, are we? She asked. Arthur shook his head slowly. No. But whoever's watching has been waiting as long as we have. With trembling hands, Arthur broke the seal. The wax cracked like a gunshot in the stillness. Inside was a single sheet of yellowed paper, the handwriting delicate but hurried. Arthur began to read aloud. Arthur, by the time you read this, the truth will have cost me everything. Margaret deserves to know before it's too late. What happened the night of the fire was not an accident. It was done to hide something. Something dangerous. I kept it because I thought it would protect us. But now it's a weight too heavy to bear. If I disappear, know this. The one you trust most is the one who lit the match. Arthur's breath caught. The fire. The shop fire. Clara's eyes widened. What fire? Before Margaret died, there was a fire in the workshop, Arthur said, his voice unsteady. I thought it was faulty wiring. We lost everything except 2 clocks, and he trailed off, his gaze fixing on the far side of the bridge, where a lone figure now stood, half hidden in shadow. The figure stepped forward into the weak glow of the nearest lamp. It was a man in his 60s, tall, his face marked with deep lines. In his hand, he held an object wrapped in cloth. You shouldn't have opened that letter, Arthur, the man called, his voice echoing across the water. Arthur's grip tightened on the paper. James, Clara turned. You know him. Arthur nodded grimly. He was my apprentice, the only one who survived the fire. The man, James, stepped closer, his eyes cold. And I'm here to make sure no one survives the truth. Part 5. The confession in the rain. The mist turned to rain again. Light at first, then heavier, coating the stone bridge in a slick sheen. Arthur's heartbeat thudded in his ears, every drop of water magnifying the silence between them. Clara took a cautious step forward. If you know something about Margaret's death, you need to speak now. James gave a bitter laugh. Speak. After 30 years of keeping my mouth shut, you think I'd spill it to her? He nodded toward Clara. She doesn't even know what you were back then, Arthur. Arthur's jaw tightened. Don't twist this, James. That fire destroyed my life, destroyed yours. James spat, his voice rising above the sound of the rain. It was supposed to destroy hers. Arthur froze. Clara's breath caught. Margaret, she whispered. James stepped closer, the wrapped object in his hands shifting slightly. She wasn't the saint you remember, Arthur. She found something in your workshop, something we were never supposed to make public. She threatened to go to the police. They wanted her silenced. And I owed them. Arthur's eyes narrowed. Owed who? James shook his head. You still don't see it. You think you ran a little clock shop on the corner. But that back room, those ledgers, they weren't just about clocks. Clara glanced at Arthur, confused, but Arthur's gaze didn't waver. He knew exactly what James was talking about. Margaret died because she wouldn't look the other way, James continued. The fire was meant to take her, but she wasn't there. She was on this bridge. Arthur's voice dropped, heavy with dread. And you followed her. The rain intensified, hammering the stone. James's grip on the wrapped object tightened. She begged me not to do it, he said, his voice cracking for the first time. Said she had to tell you everything. But if she had, you'd be dead too. So you pushed her. Clara's voice was trembling with fury. James didn't answer, but the silence was enough. Arthur's hands curled into fists. What's in your hand, James? Slowly, James unwrapped the cloth. Inside was an ornate pocket watch, blackened with soot, the hands frozen at 10:05. A single word was engraved on the back. Remember. As the rain poured around them, the truth of that night, 30 years buried, finally came to light. What are you talking about? Arthur demanded. James gestured at the watch in Arthur's hand. That wasn't the only thing she had. There's something else, something inside that could destroy everything she worked for. Something that could hurt a lot of innocent people. Clara's eyes widened. She looked from James to Arthur, her voice shaking. Why didn't you tell me this before? She whispered. Because you weren't ready, James said gently. Neither of you were. Arthur, you would have thrown her bones in the river. You couldn't bear the thought of her being alive. And Clara, you would have run to her, embraced her like the sister you never had. But I knew you wouldn't, couldn't risk it, so I kept her secret, protected her grave. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Tears streamed down Clara's face. Oh my God, she breathed, pressing a hand to her mouth. How could I have been so blind? How could I have treated him like that? Arthur stared at the watch, his face ashen. What does it mean? What is this place? The Clockmaker's daughter, James said softly, was more than just a nickname. It was a symbol, a legacy. Everything she owned, everything she ever collected, it's stored there. Hidden, safe. No one can touch it unless they have the watch. Arthur looked up, his eyes dark. Why didn't she take it with her? Why leave it behind? James shrugged. Maybe she thought it was too dangerous. Maybe she wanted to make sure it wouldn't fall into the wrong hands. Or maybe, he added, a ghost of a smile touching his lips. She knew someone would find it, that someone would come looking for her, for answers. He looked from Clara to Arthur, his gaze intense. So what are you gonna do, brothers? Are you gonna find her? Are you gonna uncover the truth? Arthur swallowed, his Adam's apple bobbing. He opened his mouth to speak, but James cut him off. Don't, he said softly. If you want to do this, if you want to honor her memory, you have to let go of your anger, of your grief. You have to be better than her enemies, smarter, more cunning. You have to become the Clockmaker's children. As the rain poured down around them, both men were silent. In the distance, the faint chime of a clock echoed through the night. Whatever secrets lay hidden in that old, abandoned factory, whatever dangers lurked in the shadows, one thing was clear. They were all about to embark on a journey that would change their lives forever. Welcome to my channel. Tonight's story is part 7, a name on the list. The wind whipped across the bridge, carrying the sharp scent of the river. Clara's mind raced. What do you mean they're coming for me? She demanded, her voice unsteady but defiant. James leaned heavily on the railing. The bruise from Arthur's punch was already swelling. Because you're on that list, Clara, your name, your real name, is right there. Arthur's brows knitted. That's ridiculous. She wasn't even born when Margaret made this list. James shook his head. You think lists like this stay frozen in time? Margaret updated it. She had eyes everywhere. If your name's here, it means you've been tied to something, whether you know it or not. Arthur unfolded the paper again, scanning the smudged ink until his eyes locked on a name near the bottom. Clara Whitmore. The letters were unmistakable. This makes no sense, Clara whispered. I've never been involved in anything illegal. I don't even know half the people on here. James gave a humorless laugh. That's the beauty of it. Sometimes, you don't need to know the game to be a piece on the board. Arthur's grip tightened around the paper. Who else knows about this? James hesitated. The people who want it back. The ones who hired me to retrieve it before you got curious. They're already looking, and if they think you've seen it. Clara swallowed hard, the weight of his words pressing down on her. So what do we do? Arthur glanced between her and the watch, then tucked the paper and the reel back into the hidden compartment. We find out why Margaret put your name here, and we finish what she started. James straightened, his eyes narrowing. That's suicide. Arthur's reply was cold. Maybe. But so is running. Before James could answer, headlights cut through the rain. A black sedan rolled slowly toward them from the far end of the bridge. James's voice was a harsh whisper. Too late. What did Arthur see in the sedan that made him move so fast? Why is Clara's name on the list? And how will they escape their pursuers? Find out next time on our channel. You ever been in a car chase? Not as a passenger, as the one behind the wheel. Well, I have. And it is terrifying. And then when you add a torrential downpour and a rickety old bridge, well, let's just say it's a recipe for disaster. Let me introduce you to Arthur. He's our driver. And no, he's not driving on the right side of the road. That's because he's in England, and this is his side of the road. Oh, and that's not a steering wheel on the right. That's the gear stick. They drive with the same gear stick in Australia, too. Arthur's trying to get away from someone or something. In the trunk, he's got Clara, who looks like she's about to throw up. And in the passenger seat, we have James, who looks like he's about to blow up. And when I say blow up, I mean explode with anger. The rain is coming down so hard now that it's blurring the lights of the sedan behind them. And oh, there goes one of the tires. It's a flat tire. But our boys don't care because they're focused on what's up ahead. That's a bridge, or at least it looks like it might be a bridge. Maybe it's a causeway. Whatever it is, it's their only option. And if they make it across, there's a good chance whoever's chasing them won't be able to. Arthur slams on the brakes, and they all pile out of the car, taking cover behind the vehicle as two men get out of the sedan. We can't see their faces, but we can see what one of them is holding. That's not good. Arthur grabs Clara and heads for the bridge. James isn't far behind, though he keeps looking back. Is he gonna bolt? Arthur reaches the end of the bridge and turns right. They're heading for a narrow maintenance walkway that runs alongside the bridge. But the second those men see them, more trouble follows. Gunfire. Arthur pulls Clara close, and the bullet rips through the wood of the walkway just above their heads. They keep running. They've got to get out of there. Another gunshot, and this time they're almost upon the men. Arthur turns left. Now they're running along the underbelly of the bridge. Below them, the river churns. Above them, the gunfire continues. And when the bullets start flying, there's only one thing to do. Keep moving. Where are they going? Are they making a break for it? Will they get away? Find out next time. Part 09, Legacy of Lies. The air grew colder as they ran, the temperature plummeting several degrees. What's happening? Clara gasped, pressing close to James. Her question was answered as they rounded a corner and came face to face with a sight that made her blood run cold. The space ahead was filled with rows upon rows of monitors displaying security footage. Some showed the bustling city above, but most were tuned to the same thing: the underbelly of the bridge. Following them, there was no mistaking those determined faces, illuminated by the pale glow of the screens. "They've got the whole place surrounded," James said grimly, stepping closer to one of the monitors. "We need to get out of here, now." But before he could move, a new voice cut through the tense silence. "Looking for this." A man stepped into view, holding a remote control in his hand. With a flick of a wrist, multiple screens went blank, plunging them into darkness. "Who are you?" Clara whispered, fear constricting her throat. The man chuckled, a low, menacing sound. "Someone who knows more about your mother than you do, sweetheart. Someone who knows everything." He gestured to the monitors. "Why don't you watch?" As if on cue, the screens flickered back to life, revealing a younger version of the man. He was standing in a lab, talking animatedly to a woman who looked strikingly similar to Clara. The woman with the kind eyes and gentle smile. That was her mother. "I have everything now. The data, the formula," the man said, his voice echoing with triumph. "All because of you. Soon, the world will be ours." The woman shook her head, her eyes filled with sadness. "No, Elias, you don't understand. This power, it can't be controlled. It's too dangerous." "Oh, come on, Thea," Elias scoffed, taking a step closer. "Don't be such a wet blanket. Think of all we could do, the lives we could change." But Thea only shook her head again, stepping back. "You're just a means to an end, Elias. You'll destroy everyone and everything to get what you want." "Then so be it," Elias hissed, his face contorting with rage. "But first, I'll make you pay." On the screen, he lunged for her, the love in his eyes turning to pure hatred. Then the feed cut abruptly, plunging them back into darkness. Silence hung heavy in the air, broken only by the distant roar of the storm. Finally, Clara spoke, her voice trembling. What did Mother see in him? What did they do? The question echoed in the vast space, unanswered. Outside, the wind screamed, as if carrying away their hope along with it. The man with the remote stood watching them, a ghost of a smile on his lips. "Some secrets are best left buried, sweetheart. But you and I, we have a lot more in common than you think. Both of us lost everything because of that bridge." He took a step closer, his eyes gleaming in the darkness. "And now, just like you, I'm going to make them pay." Part 10. The name she was never meant to hear. The three of them burst out into a narrow service tunnel under the bridge. The air here was stale and metallic, thick with the smell of rust. The tunnel sloped downward, taking them farther from the sound of the storm above. But the voice from earlier still echoed in Clara's ears. Arthur slammed the heavy metal door shut behind them and threw the latch. His hands were shaking, something Clara had never seen before. "Arthur, what is going on? Who was that man?" Clara demanded, her voice rising. Arthur's gaze darted to James, then back to her. "You weren't supposed to hear his voice. You weren't supposed to know his name," he said, his voice strained. "Why? Why do you sound like that?" "Like it's me. We have to go back," she said, reaching for the door. But James grabbed her arm, his face pale. "No, we can't. Not now. Please, Clara, trust me." He looked at Arthur, who shook his head slightly, his eyes filled with a dawning horror. "He's right, Clara. Please," Arthur said, reaching out to take her other arm. "What are you two talking about? Let me go. I need to get out there. That man, She stopped, her breath catching in her throat as the full realization hit her. The way the man had looked at her, the possessive gleam in his eye. The way he'd run his fingers over her arm when he thought no one was looking. Her blood ran cold as she turned to Arthur, her eyes wide with understanding. That man, he knew me, didn't he? He knew who I am. Arthur's face drained of color. "How did you know?" "How did he know?" James asked frantically. But Clara wasn't listening. She was staring at the door, her mind racing. The storm outside suddenly seemed distant, the wind whispering secrets through the cracks in the tunnel. She knew that name. She had heard it somewhere before, but where? Who was this man, and how did he know her? Fear, cold and sharp, pricked at her skin. She had to get out of here, away from this place, away from whoever was waiting for her in the shadows. She pushed past James, knocking him off balance, and stumbled toward the door, fumbling with the latch. "Clara, wait," Arthur called after her, his voice echoing in the narrow space. "Don't you recognize him? That name? Don't you recognize the name?" Clara paused, her hand on the latch. She turned slowly, her eyes meeting Arthur's. "I think so," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I think I do."